Bruno Hamel is a surgeon who lives with his wife Sylvie, a gallery curator, and their daughter Jasmine, who is looking forward to her birthday party in 2 weeks. Despite this, she wants to deliver her invitations today after school. Both Bruno and Sylvie are tired, so Jasmine disappointedly decides to drop them off herself after lunch. Bruno gives her a jacket, ties her bow, and urges her to be careful and head right back home. Turns out the couple isn't tired and decides to go smash cheeks now that they have the house to themselves. A few hours later, Bruno wakes up, not suspecting anything is wrong, and goes about his routine when Jasmine's schoolmates turn up asking for her as they have not seen her all afternoon. Growing increasingly concerned, Bruno calls for Jasmine but gets no response. Turns out there was also a message left on the home phone that Bruno missed, and Sylvie cusses him out for not waking earlier. They meet with the cops and give them information about Jasmine to help find her. Bruno decides to help the cops search, deciding to start at the park and follow her path to school. Bruno reassures a crying Sylvie that everything will be okay. Bruno and the two cops begin their search, heading deeper into the thick bushes when a cop spots a gruesome sight. The cops try holding Bruno back, but he rushes over to see Jasmine lifeless in the grass and breaks down in tears. As he observes her body, Bruno can see that someone had their way with Jasmine. Meanwhile, Sylvie eagerly awaits news of Jasmine, unaware of the gruesome fate. 7 days later, Bruno and Sylvie are preparing for Jasmine's funeral service. In the following days, both parents grow distant, lost in thought and depression, unable to communicate properly. A day later, Bruno gets a call from Detective Mercure. He thinks they have found Jasmine's killer based on the evidence they collected, and the culprit will be convicted. The case makes national news with the suspect named as 31-year-old Anthony Lemure, a repeat offender. His last case got thrown out due to lack of evidence, but this time the prosecutors are sure to catch him. Bruno is enraged seeing the creep's smug face, and Sylvie breaks down in tears. Bruno thinks he will get between 15 and 25 years for the crime, but they don't seem to be satisfied with that. Bruno revisits the spot where Jasmine was found. He soon decides to go back to work to keep himself occupied and thinks that Sylvie should do the same. Sylvie refuses, as she doesn't want to get over what happened. Instead of going to work, Bruno finds an abandoned cabin in the woods and heads inside. There he finds a gun, and over the next few days, he begins to make his preparations, nothing but revenge on his mind. Bruno and Sylvie sit over a silent dinner. She asks how he spends his days, and Bruno tells her he has been at the hospital, but she knows he is lying as she hadn't been able to reach him at work. Bruno hires 2 men with large amounts of cash to do some work for him at the cabin, sweetening the deal and throwing in an extra $10,000 every day for a week if the men do not talk. As everything is prepared, Bruno takes one last look at Sylvie as she sleeps before beginning his mission. While Anthony is being transported to his trial, the guard driving his transport passes out behind the wheel, as Bruno has had him drugged. The transport almost crashes. Bruno goes over pretending to help the guard but steals the transport vehicle. He drives to an abandoned lot and chloroforms Anthony, knocking him out before stuffing him into the trunk of another car. Meanwhile, Detective Mercure arrives at the scene where the transport was stolen. He goes through Bruno's car and finds his ID, regretting to know who the culprit is. Mercure reports his investigation to Sylvie, expecting to see Anthony's body turn up in a few days. Sylvie finds it hard to believe, as this is unlike Bruno. Bruno takes Anthony back to the cabin in the woods and binds him. He hoists Anthony into the air by his hands before strapping him to a table and laying him flat. Anthony soon awakens, slowly starting to freak out and calling for anyone. He sees Bruno sitting in a corner staring at him and demands to know what is happening. Bruno stands over him in silence, and Anthony recognizes him, begging Bruno to believe that he was not the one who hurt Jasmine. He promises to help Bruno hunt down the real killer if he releases him, but Bruno simply grabs a sledgehammer and smashes his knee, leaving Anthony to scream in pain as he resumes drinking his beer. Bruno then has Anthony tied by his neck, left to hop around painfully on his broken knee. Bruno leaves him there, enjoying his screams like music to his ears from the next room. Mercure gets his hands on tapes from outside the jail where they see a figure entering and plan to find out who he is. Anthony is woken up by a golden shower from Bruno, who also steps on his knee to help him wake up for day 2. Outside, He sees a dead deer and feeds it to Anthony to keep him alive. News of the kidnapping and Bruno being a suspect begins to circulate, but all this was already expected. Bruno calls Sylvie, telling her about smashing Anthony's knee and telling her it's her turn to pass on a punishment to him. Sylvie just wants Bruno to come home, but Bruno believes that he owes Jasmine a debt, and he is paying it with Anthony. Detective Mercure, who had been tapping their convo, warns Bruno to turn himself in, but Bruno plans to keep Anthony until Jasmine's birthday in a week's time, before he kills him and turns himself in. Mercure understands Bruno, as his own wife was brutally unalived by a thug. He admits that he also wanted to kill the man but is doing the right thing, but Bruno asks him if he is really being true to himself and his wife. After Bruno hangs up, Mercure is unable to trace him. Bruno goes back to Anthony. He grabs his shotgun and, deep down, wants to kill Anthony right now, but fires off shots close to him, causing him to scream in terror. Mercure is at home when his wedding ring rolls under the door to his wife's room, which he has boarded off. He is unable to face the trauma, so he calls a coworker to come over and retrieve his ring. Bruno goes back to Anthony, who now finally confesses to hurting Jasmine and begs Bruno to forgive him, but Bruno is already too far gone. He ties Anthony up by the arms and begins to beat him with a heavy chain until he passes out from the pain. Mercure meets with his team, trying to figure out where Bruno could be hiding and suspects that he must be deep in a cottage in the woods. They have no leads, but one detective doesn't think they should be trying so hard to save a guy like Anthony, but Mercure really wants to save Bruno. On day 4, Anthony is suffering from his beatings, so Bruno decides to give him some medical care to keep him going, ignoring the man's pleas to end his life, as torturing him will not bring Jasmine back. Bruno ignores him and hooks him up to a drip. Later, Bruno watches the news where his wife is interviewed and thinks he has gone crazy. Bruno calls her, angry at her for turning against him in the public eye. Bruno accuses her of not loving Jasmine enough and wanting to make love instead of following her to drop off the invitations, while Sylvie blames him for missing the phone call. The conversation is going nowhere, so the two angrily end the call. Mercure and his team overhear the argument and manage to track down Bruno's general location. He thinks Bruno is losing it and orders his team to search the area thoroughly. Bruno returns to Anthony, who tries telling him about his troubled childhood and how it caused him to lean towards violence, but Bruno cares zero. Bruno shows him a vial of curare, which is used to paralyze all motor functions but leaves the consciousness intact. Anthony begs him not to, but Bruno simply injects him, and soon, Anthony grows silent. Bruno then fits him with a respirator, shows Anthony a picture of Jasmine, and starts to cut into Anthony. While Anthony can only shed a tear, Bruno literally pulls his intestines through his side. On day 5, Bruno is making breakfast when he hears Anthony screaming out in pain, realizing what has been done to him. Anthony refuses to eat, then begins to taunt Bruno, as he doesn't seem to be enjoying himself, and wonders what else he will be coming up with. Bruno leaves the room and heads outside to have a drink, struggling to hold back the tears. As he returns to Anthony, he finally shows his true colors and admits to unaliving 3 other girls and gives Bruno their names. He tells Bruno that he enjoyed Jasmine and begins to degrade her. Bruno grabs him around the throat out of anger but realizes that's exactly what Anthony wants. Bruno contacts Mercure, asking him if having his wife's killer has made it easier for him, but Mercure is unable to answer. Mercure offers to help Bruno as he realizes he is sinking, but Bruno refuses his help. Mercure's officers then report that they are closing in on Bruno. A team of cops pulls up to a location they suspect Bruno is hiding out in. They surround the house and barge in with their guns drawn, only to find a remotely controlled computer faking Bruno's location. They track down another location from his ISP, but they also find another decoy laptop there. Bruno stops by a local gas station to pick up supplies, and the cashier seems to recognize his face. She confronts him about his identity but reveals that she supports what Bruno is doing, telling him, "Thanks." This seems to motivate Bruno, who returns to Anthony with a scalpel in hand. Meanwhile, Mercure is sure that Bruno is calling from around the area he suspected, and has all his men out looking for him. Later, both Bruno and Mercure are watching the news report, and it's revealed Bruno told the news about the other girls Anthony took out. Most of the parents agree with him and urge him to make Anthony pay for his crimes, all except one woman, who thinks that what Bruno is doing is pointless. This doesn't sit well with Bruno, who hatches a plan. That night, the same woman is in her apartment when she senses that something is wrong. She goes to check things out but sees no one. Suddenly, she is attacked and knocked out by Bruno. He ensures that the coast is clear before stuffing her into his car. A few minutes later, the woman awakens and comes face to face with Bruno. Bruno tells her she can make her comments because she hasn't faced her daughter's killer. This turns out to be true, as Bruno drags her to see Anthony while she fights and struggles, refusing to. Bruno drags her to face him, then hands her a sledgehammer, urging her to finish off the man that took the life of her daughter. She refuses to, so Bruno locks her inside the room, forcing her to confront her denial. Later, Bruno comes to get her, and the two talk. She had done well in wiping Anthony from her mind and moving on with her life, but Bruno scoffs as he thinks it's impossible. The woman thinks that Bruno torturing Anthony is actually killing his daughter all over again, but Bruno loses his temper and punches her, knocking her out. He then leaves her on the side of the road, then abandons her car along a dirt road close to the cabin. That night, Bruno starts trashing the place out of anger and frustration while looking at Anthony's unconscious body on the ground. Eventually, the woman Bruno kidnapped makes her way back to the police and gives them information about what happened with her. Soon a cop stumbles upon the woman's car and calls it in. Bruno has a vision where he sees Jasmine and attempts to clean her up. He comes to terms with her death and breaks down in tears. Meanwhile, the cops and reporters gather a distance off from Bruno's cabin and begin their approach. Bruno tells Anthony that today is Jasmine's birthday. He then surprisingly unlocks Anthony's restraints. Mercure and the cops arrive at the cabin, and Mercure urges Bruno to give himself up over a megaphone. Bruno walks from the home and gives himself over to the police without a fight. As the cops read him his rights and lead him away, a reporter asks if he thinks revenge is right, and he answers no, but when he is also asked if he regrets his actions, he tells them no.